Welcome to the Sacred Life. I'm your host, Aaron Beachy, coming to you from Higher Ground Fellowship in Kokomo, Indiana. We at the Sacred Life are dedicated to practical Christian ideas. Today will be the second episode in a series on education. Joining us today is John Baylor, and also joining us today is David Baylor. John will be sharing our topic with us today, which will be the end of homework. John, what's that all about?
Well, when we talked about doing a series on education, then I had my sights set on homework right away. I came up with this huge list of potential topics, and it was pretty high up the list. I started looking into the history of homework about 8 years ago or so, and just trying to figure out this is something that we do. Everybody does this, and we just sort of take it for granted that this is the way that education is done. And we'll find out it's really not that old. It's a very sort of modern creation. Um, and I have I'll get into some of the potential problems with homework as we get into this. So I won't try to say too much of that in my introduction. But I will say that I've thought, man, it would be better if we could limit homework and not do as much as what we've done in recent history. And I've thought also that it wouldn't work to abolish homework and get rid of it.
Okay.
It's too big of a disruption to the system to just like to say, all right, teachers, you're not going to assign homework anymore. Like your teachers are going to get mad and quit. And if they don't, if they do what they're supposed to do and stop assigning homework, if an administrator tells them that, then parents will be angry. And parents will say, like, this guy's a terrible teacher because he's not assigning any homework. And he'll say, well, the administration told me not to assign anymore. And the parents will say, I don't care, I hate you. And then the teacher will say, well, fine, I quit. So you like so many people within the system would become frustrated with it that it would just do a lot of damage to education if we just decided let's get rid of homework. But I feel like we're at this point in history where like homework is sort of being abolished for us in a sense by this artificial intelligence technology, which I'll mention
Yeah,
a little bit.
and I just interject there, like we're also at a point where the system has been kind of demolished already
Well, yeah, right. Although,
by a number of different things.
yeah. I don't know how many of those would really lead to revolutions in homework, although some of them will. I mean, we've got lots of means of learning that are available to us that don't involve homework. I mean, I would say I'm learning constantly. I mean, everybody at this table, I would say, is learning a lot all the time, and nobody's giving us homework assignments. So most learning doesn't take place by homework assignments.
Right.
Anyway, that's a little off topic. I'll go ahead and close my introduction off there. But just with that little tease that AI is going to present some serious challenges to homework in the present and in the near future.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just interject there again that personally I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm worried about abolishing the system, tearing it all down overnight. That
Right, and that's probably somewhere where you and I differ, is you're kind of looking for, I would maybe tend to look more for solutions within the system, and I tend to look for solutions
well,
beside the system, I would say.
I mean, sort of. I would say that now this is a more general discussion than just homework right here, but there are. I think that the solutions to the system will come from outside the system and not from within it. And so in that way, I'm very interested in private school, in homeschooling, and in other independent, as I was referencing before, independent ways of learning that are available to people. So I'm very interested in those things, but also from I'm not currently teaching at a public school right now, but I have, and I've been colleagues with people that are still in the trenches right now, and so I am definitely interested in like, okay, whether I think the system is flawed or not, it doesn't matter. People do have to work within that system, and so what's the best way to approach things if you're inside of public education?
Okay. Um, Now that we maybe kind of have visions of kids marching on their principal with pitchforks against homework and things, I kid.
They're too lazy.
Can you,
None of them have pitchforks anymore.
Right.
Can you give us some history of homework and how something like that started, or that type of educational system got started?
Okay, so as I mentioned, homework is really not that old. I mean, if you go back to like the founding fathers of America, like homework is not even as old as the United States of America. So all those people that we respect are Thomas Jeffersons and George Washingtons. They grew up in a world without homework. Um, this comes, I can't tell you exactly when it comes into Germany, but we got it from what we just call it the Prussian education system. We say that our American education is built on the Prussian model of education. There was this guy Horace Mann who was a very very significant education reformer in the United States, and he like through the 1840s and 50s was responsible for a lot of developments in education. And one of these was he really admired what they were doing in Prussia. Um, and in a sense, what they were doing, now this I've read this as a sort of editorial opinion. I don't know if I can say this as historical fact, but they're trying to like provide a kind of unity, a national unity, and they're trying to do that through education, and that's what a lot of the Prussian education system is based on. And so you could say that like assigning homework is part of a system for um, ultimately for the government getting everybody to be uh, under their power and influence more, and for families to be under their power and influence more. That's maybe that's too cynical of an interpretation. I don't know, but I do think there's truth in it.
I would just put in there that like actually quite a lot of our modern Western culture, our modern Western values actually come from the Prussian model.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's a very nationalistic model.
Right. Yes.
Their goal is to create a singular German identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can definitely see that in the United States with
Right.
like movements toward Common Core. Like we need to get a nationally standard curriculum for all schools,
Right.
for everybody in the whole United States.
Right. So the Prussians wanted the individuals to buy into being in German, where they wouldn't have previously.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they also wanted, this is a lot of what we think of as like very exacting and precise German stereotypes. That's actually Prussian.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So if you have that picture in your mind, what you're thinking of is
Yeah,
this Prussian system.
Like your darkest image of like what is the worst of Germany and this mechanistic controlling.
Right.
That's that image that you have in your mind is what we based our education system off of.
Right.
Homework like it didn't become universal immediately in the middle of the 1800s. It's something that kind of grew as a movement over time, and people didn't like it, especially pre-industrial society, where like my kids can't be doing homework because they've got work to do when they get home from school. We got a farm that we're trying to run, and sorry, we're not going to be doing homework all night. So there was a lot of backlash against it. California made a law. They made this law in 1901, I believe. I wrote this down on here. 1901. It lasted for 16 years, where it was illegal in the state of California to assign homework. So there was so much backlash against it that there were laws passed against it, or there was one in California. There were other groups like health organizations, children's health organizations that said like basically homework is bad for kids' health, and so we shouldn't be assigning any homework. In a sort of you could say political argument against homework. There was also I don't think I've got this one written down. 1930, the American Child Health Association declared homework to be a form of child labor, and so trying essentially another effort to outlaw homework by saying, hey, child labor is illegal and homework is child labor and we should make it illegal. So like tons of backlash spanning several decades in the early 20th century.
I know quite a few. I could think of quite a few of my peers in school that would have really liked that illustration.
Yeah. As a Mennonite, of course, I like child labor. I think we could use more of it. But no, I do. I'm kind of torn because in our industrial society, like you can definitely have major problems with child labor and exploitation of children and all that. So, I mean, I understand why those laws exist. And at the same time, I think, man, the kid who grows up on a farm is lucky because he is allowed to work and other kids are not allowed to work.
Right.
They're not allowed to do something that contributes to society and to the community that is around them.
Well, so like, which kind of illustrates the point that the rise of the modern education system is also kind of part of the rise of like a completely artificial way of life and like an artificial set of values.
Mm-hmm.
And people are trying to come up with answers and cope with a rapidly changing reality.
Yeah, right.
And there were going back to Prussia, there were legitimate reasons why at that time people were looking to Prussia for inspiration because the Prussian project was enormously successful.
It was, but then we wind up with like, Germany is the most evil nation in the world,
Right.
which I mean, lasted for this first part of the 20th century, which I've been talking about recently.
Well, I was going to bring up that point, like in the minds of their neighbors, like even in the second half of the 19th century, the Prussians, the Germans were like the great,
right,
just like the great empire that wanted to gobble everything up.
And so we finally put a stop to that, and we haven't had too much trouble with them since the end of World War II. After World War II, the most evil nation in the world was like incapacitated and pacified, and kind of got better and everything. And so when we were trying to progress our education system, we didn't know where to turn anymore. Right. And so finally we turned our eyes toward the Soviet Union. So once we got off of this Prussia kick, then our interest did shift there because we were scared of the Soviet Union, and we felt like these people, not only they're dangerous, but their kids are learning more than what our kids are. They're going to be smarter than we are, and we've got to do something to combat this. Well, so like throughout the Cold War, like homework had kind of become more or less accepted prior to the Cold War, but during that time, homework loads just kept getting bigger and bigger because we were trying to compete with Russia, and our United States government was trying to encourage, like one of the ways that you can help kids succeed is by making them do homework.
Let's play. I want to play devil's advocate just a little bit here. Go back to Prussia in the second half of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. So we're talking about Germany, and you can think of during that time period in terms of science and technology, what Germany was accomplishing. So it's like there's a very valid reason people are looking to Germany as a model of like these guys must be doing.
Well, and those are the same things that we would look to the Soviet Union for because they put Sputnik into space.
Right.
Like, I mean that was a. I mean, it's kind of actually just in the history of homework is like a sort of a major turning point because we get this sense these people can accomplish things technologically that we cannot.
To be fair, for both the Soviets and the Americans, it was still the Germans putting everything into space. True. But I'm just bringing up that point. Like, you can understand why there was that drive towards the Prussian system because it's like as antagonistic as Prussia was to everybody else, and as scary as they were, and all of the negative things that even then at that time people could see. It was hard to argue with the success that they were having.
Yeah, right.
So like tremendous advancements in engineering, especially engineering and like rocketry.
Right.
And like all of these high level fields, like we think of Einstein. Einstein is a product, at least to some degree, of the German system. So it's like, well, how do you argue with that? Like if you're looking for inspiration, if you're this up and coming America that's still kind of trying to find its place in the world, America at this point hasn't established itself as a country of any real importance, any real significance on the world stage.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say, I don't want to flesh this out too much, but you get this sense, you could say, like within a biblical worldview, that committing your society to the most technological advancement possible is not going to be good for you spiritually. And I think you can look back on the course of history and see like, okay, that's what Germany did. and it was not good for them. I guess you could sort of, I'll go ahead and plug the Soviet Union in there. It's a little less obvious in a sense, but they were working really hard to compete with us technologically. And okay, so we'd say the same thing about the Soviet Union. You would say the same thing about the United States. Like we've worked so hard to be innovative and advance in technology, and we have more people committing suicide than ever before. Like we're in a very spiritually dark place. And again, it's like that shift in values to this technological excellence is part of that RDK.
Right.
So make the case for homework.
For homework. Okay.
I've heard a lot of kind of antagonist approach here towards it in our discussions here so far.
Yeah, right.
About our Prussian culture and the Soviet Union and things like that. But in the modern culture that we are living in, I think things have kind of turned a little bit on their head. Like we went from an agrarian culture to an industrialized culture to now you said nobody has a pitchfork and nobody even knows what a pitchfork. So what's maybe the case for it? What's the value in it?
Okay. Well, I would say like I kind of already presented part of the case for it, which is let's look at the model that we're using, Germany, what they were able to accomplish. Of course, I would counter that with the question, what's Germany doing today with homework? Like Germany and the countries that use the modern German model are still leading the world in education, in what they're producing. So it's like, well, I don't know what the answer is. I've been to Switzerland, and my impression I got from Swiss school children is that they don't have very much homework. And they use the German model, the modern German model.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of, I guess, going against my argument just a little bit there. I would see it kind of like we took the Prussian model and became like hyper excessive with it.
Yeah, and mostly we became hyper obsessive, like in the 70s and 80s, in very recent times, much later than when we were really basing our education system on what they were doing at the time.
Right. I guess since I already put myself in that role of devil's advocate, I'll just keep doing that, advocating for homework, even though, full disclaimer, I hated homework, and when I was in school, I never did it.
You wouldn't know. You never did it.
But so, if your goal is technical accomplishment, then it seems like it makes logical sense. Well, you should make this a priority for your child to be learning technical skills and drilling those and incorporating them thoroughly.
So part of the question though is just simply, is homework actually going to help you to accomplish those goals?
Right, and I would say on surface levels it seems logical to think so.
Right, yeah. Right. We assign homework to very young children. Now I have to be a little bit skeptical of any kind of research that's done on the effectiveness of different teaching practices, because whoever's doing the research already knows their conclusion before they've done the research, and so they set up their test in a way to get the results that they want. So people that are researching the effectiveness of homework are mostly people that have already decided homework is not working and not going to go prove it. That little caveat being said, now that I've undermined the point that I'm making, research indicates that homework doesn't have any benefit for young children. That it has a small amount. Then this is in terms of academic achievement. That it has a small amount of benefit for older children, for high school kids or whatever. But before you get to that point, and definitely in early elementary, it doesn't help them in school. But research does tend to suggest, although it's divided, that for kids that are a little older, there is benefit. They will know more when they get out of school because they were doing homework.
Yeah. So here's an illustration. So like you and I both do some computer programming, coding. So that's something that is very obvious when you do it. You can read, you can go look stuff up online, you can read books, and you can study these things. But the only way to actually learn how to do it is to practice it, is to do it. So like, why? Like that's an illustration.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that the true of anything?
although
So if I want you to learn how to do algebra,
right.
you should just go practice algebra.
But it's not just, and I'm a little bit off topic of homework on this, but this does fit in with, I guess you could say, like my whole philosophy of education, that the meaning is also part of how you learn something. So when you talk about you learn computer programming by coding, by writing computer programs, that's how you learn how it works. Okay, that's true, but when you're doing that, you have a purpose. You are not writing that code in order to learn the code. You're writing that code in order to produce the program that you're trying to make. So there's a purpose behind it. And that is why you are learning as you're doing it. And if somebody gives you a worksheet and says, okay, this has all these computer programming concepts on it that you're supposed to learn, fill this out and bring it back to me tomorrow, now it no longer has a purpose. Right. You're not trying to accomplish something by filling this out. You're just doing what the teacher told you to do. Right. And so my position is that you will learn a lot less from this activity than you will from your I'll use a nice Rick Warren phrase, or your purpose-driven work that you were doing before.
Right, and so like I'll go back to my computer programming example and illustrate that that's true. It's like a lot of books that you learn stuff from, you know, how a normal book is arranged. They'll be manically arranged into chapters, and very often at the end of every chapter they'll have like a test for you to do. Mm-hmm. And what I learned pretty quickly is those tests are worthless. Like if I go through those tests and test what I just learned in that chapter, it's like I don't actually learn anything. Mm-hmm. So I mean, maybe that just goes back to my age-old hatred of homework, but it's just the same thing. It's like, well, you're practicing the technical skill, but when the skills actually become useful is when they actually become useful is when you're trying to take them and solve a problem.
Yeah, right. And I will try to tie that into our homework discussion. So maybe I have this fear that we're dragging this video on a long time by digging into these things, but these are actually points that I wanted to get around to later, essentially. I want to make a few other comments just in terms of the case for homework. I would say most of our discussion has been kind of like abstract philosophical, and when you zoom down and you put yourself in the role of a teacher, you know, trying to teach the kids and run the classroom and everything, then you know, you have to wrestle with the reality in a different way. If you're a teacher, you do want your kids doing some kind of work. I do believe like there's benefits in a good old-fashioned lecture, although those are kind of hated by a lot of you could say progressive educators. You know, the idea that the teacher would just stand up and teach something to students, that's appalling to some people. But I do believe in that kind of instruction, and certainly there's a place for that. But there's also a place for kids to learn by doing something and practicing it and having a goal that they're trying to accomplish using the tools that you're asking them to use. Right. So you want them to be doing things. And if you say, all right, I'm never going to assign homework, but kids do need to do work, they're just going to do it all in class. So well, okay, how about the goofball over there who's, you know, like throwing paper airplanes during class, or like he's not doing his work, so I guess he just gets an F in the class because you're not assigning homework. But I mean, so you like that's one use of homework at least is just like, all right, what you don't get done in class, you can finish on your own time and then bring it back into me. Right. People will also argue that that you're developing good habits in students and helping them to develop a sense of responsibility. Like, all right, you when you go home this evening, you can't just have fun. You've also got responsibilities that you got to take care of. I'm not that excited about that argument, frankly, because well, just like in the 1800s, when you came home and you had chores to do on the farm, kids can have responsibilities at their house, in their families, and in my experience as a parent, homework interferes with my child's meaningful responsibilities.
Well, yeah, and I would make the observation that I think for a lot of children, it actually winds up being the opposite. That it doesn't teach them responsibility. They've got, you know, you've got your responsibility that you need to take care of when you get home. It actually teaches them to resent responsibility. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, I have this weight hanging over my head of this work that I have to get done. I don't see any reason for it. It doesn't accomplish anything. Right. If I have like chores to do, like I got to go milk the cows, or I got to go,
Well, and so, I
do
mean,
this
I
or
want to
that.
move away from the farm examples a little bit because most people don't live on farms now.
Well, yeah, but
I don't live on a farm, but like my daughter, when she's not in school, then she'll set the table, she'll help with the dishes. Like
right. My point there remains
these
the same.
tasks are better than homework
Yeah.
because they are making the world a better place.
Right, and that's what I was going to get to is with those actual responsibilities that are actual responsibilities that are real, then the child is actually accomplishing something that they can see a purpose and a reward for. So it's like your daughter can see that this has been helpful to her mother.
Right.
Yeah. And that means more than a grade.
Yeah.
Like a grade means very little to a child.
Yeah. So I think that pretty well covers the case in favor of homework.
I think our discussion of in favor kind of ended up being a discussion of both points.
Yeah, right, it did. And then you kind of mentioned this, but I just wanted to repeat this as well, that some skills do require practice. And if I'm especially, you use computer programming as an example, and I would say like, man, if you're trying to learn a concept in math, then it's very similar to programming in the sense like just do it several times and then you're going to learn it. Right. So if I'm the teacher and I say, all right, I want you guys to have lots of practice in this, and all their practice time is instead of homework, it's class time, then that means, okay, I guess I won't teach anything today because you're just going to be doing your practice. So that's kind of a waste of time because if I'm the math teacher, like I'm an expert teacher, an expert in mathematics, and when you're with me, when these kids are with me, they should be learning the things that I can teach them. So it's a lot more, it's a better use of my time with the kids for them to do their practice at home than to do it here in my classroom. And I think that's about as strong of an argument in favor of homework is what I think I'm able to present. And certainly there's a place for that, and again, especially in upper grades.
So maybe listening to the conversation thus far, it sounds to me kind of like we as a culture, or maybe even, let's take it a little more closer to home, maybe we as a church need to be a little more attentive to what we're doing in relation to the environment that we're living in. Like, I think in some cases, I think we're throwing blanket solutions at problems that maybe don't exist anymore. And maybe it's become a little one size fits all in so many ways, so to speak. I don't know.
Okay. What's like the specific? You mentioned problems that don't exist anymore. What do you have in mind?
Well, for instance, you mentioned the idea that most kids don't live on a farm anymore. But at the same time, we also are living in a culture where kids need more activity outside of a school.
Yeah,
setting.
right.
And so maybe we need a little more understanding to that fact.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're given, I'll move on to the case against homework. If you're giving a kid homework, then it's that homework time is time that's taken away from other activities that they might be doing. And it's true that those activities include like vegging out in front of the television, or like, I don't know, sitting around and doing nothing, just laying on the couch or whatever, like maybe instead of doing a lazy, time-consuming, deliberately like time-wasting activity, maybe instead they can do something where they're learning. Okay, so that's part of it. But it's also potentially taking time away from, as we mentioned, like chores that they would have around the house, but also time that they spend playing outside. And if you want kids to learn more than like relative to what we're doing right now, then a really good way to get kids to learn more is to actually spend less time doing academic work and more time playing. If you try to like just cram a bunch of knowledge into a little kid's head, it's just not going to work. They can't absorb it. They can't handle it. They go out and play. They come back and they're like mentally refreshed. But also, also when you give a kid a few ideas and then they go out and play, they are playing with those ideas that you gave them. I mean, my daughter, she'll have she had this piece of paper and she's like writing down math facts and she's like, okay, what's 6 plus 6, you know? And I tell her, and then she's like, okay, so what's 12 plus 12? And I tell her, and she's just adding all these numbers and like watching them get bigger and bigger as the page goes down. And eventually, like, we get to the point where it's like, Lily, we can't play this game anymore. You have to do your math homework. And I mean, she'll draw pictures and she'll ask how to spell different words, you know, so she can write a little description underneath, so she's kind of telling a story or whatever. And it's like, Lily, you can't do this anymore. You have to do this assignment where you're writing a sentence to describe the picture that like. I mean, the very things that the teachers want her to learn, she wants to play with those things, and she can't do that. So like, it's not educationally benefiting her to interfere with that opportunity for her to play with ideas. And then the other thing is you're potentially interfering with the kid's social time, which also like is going to lead to a happier, healthier child, which means a child that's able to learn and retain things better. So like there are a lot of ways where homework actually directly interferes with a child's academic learning.
Right. So we have an interesting environment that we're in today with all of the technology that we have. We have a lot of artificial intelligence coming onto the scene.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to affect something like homework or education?
So this is, you know, I'm actually, in a way, I'm surprised at how little I hear about this, because this is a topic that I research, and I research it in relation to education, and so I've read quite a bit about this, and it's just kind of shocking to me how, like, if you're not trying to read about education and artificial intelligence, then the story is still like kind of under the radar in a sense. But a company, OpenAI, recently, at the end of November, released this Chat GPT, an artificial intelligence that can write things for you. And so you prompt it with a text. So you just describe, write a story about a 5-year-old girl who's, like outside having an outdoor adventure, and then it's going to write a story for you Now, it's not going to be like A+ work, but it is going to write a story for you. And there are a couple other technologies that are doing the same thing, but this Chat GPT is kind of the most prominent one of them right now. And kids are using this right now. This isn't something that kids can do in the future if they only think of it, but like kids are doing this all the time right now. When they've got an essay, then they can tell Chat GPT, here's the essay that I want you to write for me, basically, and then this thing produces an essay. It again is not going to produce A+ work. I haven't worked with I haven't graded. I'm not teaching right now, so I haven't seen these types of assignments show up. But from teachers who do, they say like, well, this will give you like B- or C work. Somebody gave it an SAT test, and it got a 1060 on the test, and that's like, it's a 52nd percentile, so it's basically like a C, you would say, like just right in the middle range. So that's the kind of work that it's capable of producing. And for a very intelligent student, then it might seem like, oh, a C, that's not a very good grade, but it saved me hours and hours of work writing an essay. And so, like, okay, that's a trade-off a lot of kids are willing to take, even the very, very intelligent kids. Now, if you're not a very strong student and you were going to get a C anyway, or you were going to get a D, then there's just no reason to not use this Chat GPT. And this can write your essays for you. As I run through my classes that I taught and my assignments that I gave students, there were some projects that a text-based thing wouldn't be able to do. But like when I think of the questions that kids were supposed to answer, I mean, it's basically like every question on every assignment that I ever gave to my students, this technology would be able to answer for them. And so this is like really game-changing technology, very disruptive technology. And when tech people use the word disruptive, then it's like, yeah, we did something, we disrupted. And for me, it's like, even though I'm very very negative on homework and the consequences of homework, when I see this thing that comes in and again, as I mentioned, I used the phrase before, destroys the system overnight, then I think, man, we're not going to be able to handle this very well. This is going to really ruin the way that we educate children. And if we ruin the way we educate children, we can recover. We can make a new system, and maybe we can make one that works better than the existing system. But in the meantime, before we come up with that, then we've got years and years of kids going through school that are just they're just wasting their time. I mean, kids are sort of wasting their time in school anyways, prior to Chat GPT. But like, I mean, again, this comes in and just really wrecks an already wrecked system. And so yeah, you can find reason to be optimistic, but I think in the short term, this is going to be problems for a lot of teachers and for a lot of students who aren't going to be learning as a consequence of it. So I guess I'll make a couple of comments of okay, well, is this really the end of education? This kind of technology. There are things that teachers are doing to try to get around it, like having kids write things by hand, by having kids not do homework and only do their work in class when they're under direct supervision by the teacher, so that they can guarantee that nobody's using these kind of programs. So those are options, and both of them are like really old school. Again, paper and pencil, or we're going to go so old school that homework doesn't even exist anymore. So we'll go back to the early 1800s or before, and just only, I mean, in the early 1800s, it's just like every kid might have a slate that they write on with chalk. You're not going to take that home with you and do homework. It's all in class while the teacher's there supervising you. So, I mean, we can go to a kind of a system like that. Now, this sort of ties in with some of the discussion that we had before, but another possibility is just giving kids optional homework, which seems strange. It seems like, okay, you're here you are saying that if kids can cheat and get this grade, then they're going to cheat. So if you give them the option of doing homework, obviously they're not going to do it. But again, this will have a little bit more of this education research, which I said there's reason to, take it with a grain of salt. But there's pretty good evidence to say that when teachers make homework optional, kids do more homework than when the homework is mandatory. And it sort of ties to this difference between you're programming something and now like you're making something versus somebody gives you a worksheet and you're supposed to fill it out and get it done. Yeah. When the homework is optional, like you're doing your own thing, you're learning and working independently, and you're doing it because you sense that I'm going to learn something if I do this.
Yeah. So there's this interesting trait in humans is that they don't really like to be told to do things, like in general,
right? Yeah.
But especially like things that seem meaningless.
Yeah, right.
But we also really like to accomplish things.
Yeah.
So it's like, well,
yeah, I mean,
can you figure out a
look
way?
at optional homework as like a sort of a dare or a challenge,
right?
Like, I don't know if you can handle this. Not everybody's going to accept the challenge. But here's this other story that you could read, to go along with the stuff that we did in class or whatever. Right. And then another thing. Now this is really tricky. This is sound advice for teachers that I'm giving right here, but it's really difficult to pull off in practice. But another possibility is you give work that is meaningful and that students understand to be meaningful. In an English class, now this is like the minority of what I would teach or what I would assign. The students do some degree of personal writing where they're talking about their own lives. And I did a couple things that were similar to this, but I'll just use one assignment as an example. This we did a lot of build up to this and reading literature that kind of related to this, so they could see it in action, where they can see somebody coming face to face with their own struggles and their own difficulties and things that they didn't want to face and trauma from their past and all that, like coming face to face with it and growing through that process. And when we'd seen that kind of pattern enough times, then I gave them a writing assignment, and I did give them an alternative. It would be a mistake to force people to do what I did ask them to do. So I did give them another, like a back door where they could do something else instead. But basically the assignment was, I want you to write about the most difficult thing, the thing that you most want not to talk about, that you don't want other people to know about. That's what I want you to write for this assignment. And I mean, I present it as a challenge, and I present it as a challenge that you will grow from. And I mean, like I read the kind of things that students give to me when I give that kind of assignment, and it's I would say in a sense nothing shocks me. I've worked at a therapeutic boarding school for at-risk teenagers, and I would tell my kids like whatever you've been through, I've known someone who's been through something worse. Like whatever you think is going to shock me, I don't like. I'm still going to accept you, even if you reveal this thing to me. And I mean, I would have kids be extremely honest with me about things. And like I said, in a sense, nothing really did shock me, but it is surprising to see one essay after another. It's like, man, this kid is going through this, and like, oh man, this happened to this kid's parents. And I mean, like just the volume of kids that have pretty serious trauma. The whole, again, the volume of it is what really was shocking to me. But I say that to say, like, this is an example of an assignment that's meaningful to kids. And I make it directly clear, this is how this is going to benefit you in your life. This is how you're going to grow in your own understanding of yourself, and this is what that can mean for how your life can be different as a result of this kind of, I mean, I might as well just say this kind of confession.
Right. Well, I think that is a good segue into the question of how do these things that we've discussed connect to practical Christian ideas?
Okay, yeah, I mean, so, well, in this example, you know, I'm talking about this idea of confession, although that's sort of specific to this one essay, and that's not
right.
Most work that you ask kids to do during school, you can't. This wouldn't make sense.
Right. Or I think your
approach, sort of like facing your demons kind of element, like.
Right, and I guess that's not what I'm getting at with my question into that, but your approach was to give the kids something that is going to bring them a practical life experience and something that brings some meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I think it comes back to having like a meaning focused view of everything.
Right. Yeah.
So like education isn't something like, you know, I have my church life and my religious life, and I have my work life, and I have my education. Like these are all separate boxes. Like no, these things are all thoroughly intertwined. Like especially like Christianity like extends into everything. So like we're applying a Christian I guess a Christian ethic to the theory of education, and that ethic is things are meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that is the best thing is the thing with the most meaning.
Yeah, and you can just directly contrast this with, well, a materialistic worldview or a secular approach to education. I mean, those are kind of the same thing in a sense.
Yeah, right.
In a materialistic worldview, nothing has meaning. It's, you know, everything is just you know, things, and the things that we think are meaningful, you know, those are just like some you know, strange chemical action going on in our brains and our bodies that like make us think that there's some sort of meaning to the physical reality that's around us. I mean, that's the secular view. And so, I mean, that's part of the reason why I say that the problem I really want to address in this series is a problem of this meaning crisis in education. And the reason that I think that the church can solve this and no one else except the church can solve this is because only the church can actually grapple with meaning.
Yeah. So like, let's go back to Prussia. So you could almost say that the Prussian model is an atheistic model. And the reason I say that is because I guess you could, the theory, the ethos, the ideology of the Prussians was Enlightenment philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So like you think especially of Frederick the Great Prussian king, that is one of the early figures rising Prussia to this great prominence, is pretty antagonistic to tradition and the old things, and pretty antagonistic to religion. And so this Prussian system is like, this is like the Enlightenment carried out to, I guess you could almost say, to an extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So this fiercely rational view of everything. So like nothing has meaning. Everything is just logic and reason.
But in a sense, you use, I might have used it before you, but you use the word nationalism to describe what this Prussian model was all about. And there's nationalism was kind of a new idea at the time, and that's strange for a modern person to think about. But you can kind of see it when you put it in this context, because like the state becomes the highest thing, and that's ultimately like what nationalism is. And you're supposed to spend your life as an individual serving the state.
Well,
I mean that is an atheistic worldview. This like material system, the state here. This is the thing that really matters. This is the God of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, like a good, really good illustration of that is like famously when they were uniting Germany, they wanted to unite the German people. The Prussians intentionally left Austria out. And the reason for that is because Austria represented the old world. Austria represented a value system that was opposed to the Prussian model of Germany. So like Austria was very traditional, Austria is Catholic, Austria is all these things that Prussia doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
And so they create a German national identity that, there's no room for Austria in our national identity, so they're just not allowed to be a part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we're drifting a little bit, so we'll come back to this idea. But again, the central theme of the whole series on education is this idea of meaning. And if this isn't something you would typically say like directly to somebody, but there are things that you do that will kind of raise the question, or raise the urge or the impulse. Do something meaningful with your life. And if you kind of feel that this idea coming to you, do something meaningful with your life, then you think, okay, what would that mean? What would it mean to do something that's meaningful to my life? Then, you might think of like, okay, well, if I'm doing something that serves myself and advances my own career, that's not actually as meaningful as if I'm doing something that's good for other people that are around me. And I mean, it's like in a sense, you can kind of like keep zooming out. I was focused on myself, and now I'm focusing on my friends that are around me. Like, okay, well, what's the point of doing good for my friends? Or, I put it like, doing something meaningful might mean not just not serving myself, but serving something or someone other than myself. But it might also mean like putting myself in a position where I come to harm because I'm serving other people, because I'm serving a community, or I'm serving something that's outside of myself.
It's a very, very Christian idea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the direction I'm going, obviously. Okay, but I can get this notion that like if I'm going to do something meaningful with my life, maybe it means that. And wait a minute, why in the world would I allow myself to come to harm so that I can help somebody else? I mean, like just what I'm trying to get at is if you look for meaning, then ultimately you are looking for God and the goodness of God and the truth of God. Like this idea of like bringing pain to myself, or like um, accepting death in the service of other people, sort of following this ultimate example of Christ. Um, why in the world would I do that? Like,
Well,
I think you like you know that this is good. You can't talk yourself out of that being the ultimate good.
yeah, but
And it can only be the ultimate good um, if the thing that you're serving ultimately is God. And the reason I go through this whole thing is just to say that like just the very idea, do something meaningful with your life. It is a religious impulse, and like if you carry if you carry that, you meditate on that idea of I'm going to do something meaningful with my life. You carry that far enough, you meditate on it, you go deep enough with that idea, then it is a religious idea.
yeah, well, let's look at the alternative to that, which is, I don't know, I guess you could say the theory of modern American culture, at least, which is do what serves you, like do what makes you happy, pursue what makes you prosperous. And so, like, what's the immediate problem with that is more than half of all teenage girls in the United States have considered suicide. I think it's like something like 40% of teenage boys have considered suicide. So like alarming numbers of of people who just think that their lives are absolutely meaningless. Well, it's because they've been given a meaningless world.
I think some of your numbers are referring to depression rather than suicide.
Maybe I was going off of the latest numbers from the CDC.
Yeah,
that just came out recently. They were
depression numbers.
The suicide numbers for girls.
Oh, they're very high.
They were. I'm thinking they were over half. They were super high.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. I think you're
No,
you're on a different statistic there.
But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I referenced like suicide rates earlier in the conversation, and like depression rates, like these things are out of control.
Well,
but there are lots of reasons for those, and lots of.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more on that point. Is like the other thing of that is you're presented with a world with a life in crisis, and people are desperately trying to find solutions to that problem. And so they come up with just the wildest, stupidest, most obviously false solutions to their problems, which is like, well, maybe I'm the wrong gender, or maybe I'm, maybe I can bend reality to make me happy. It's like, well, I'm sorry, you can't bend reality. Instead, what you have to do is find meaning within your reality. And like you said, like oftentimes that meaning comes down to the opposite of what our culture's impulse is to teach you to do. Like ultimately that meaning is like let go of your own best interest.
I want to make a couple other comments. I would like to wrap this up quickly because this has already been like 3 times as long as what I was hoping this would be. But one other comment that I would like to make on meaningful work, meaningful homework, I mean. My daughter has books that she reads, although she's sort of out of this stage in her education right now. But she would have these books that were they existed to teach her certain words. The reason and the only reason that you would read this book is because you're trying to learn how to read and you're learning these words. And she would read through these things and she would say, "That's a dumb story." They're dumb stories. Like, I mean, she has heard lots of good stories in her life, and she immediately recognized this. Essentially, is like there is not a meaning in reading this thing right here. There is, people are promising me there's some kind of benefit. They're promising me it will help me in the long term, and that sort of thing happens all the time in education where kids ask, well, why do we have to learn this? And it's like, well, in the future, this and this and this will help you in this way right here. And it might seem to the teacher like that's a good answer, but it really is not motivating to the student. Saying that it's going to benefit you, I mean, you might even say like benefit you materially in the future. That does not answer the question, why do I have to read this thing? In my daughter's case, like it would be better to Probably. I mean, probably better to give her a story that's harder, but that is worth reading, because then she's going to want to put the effort into reading it, even though, again, theoretically the struggle is greater, but if she's invested in it, if it has meaning for her, then she's going to learn the tools along the way. And for upper grades, you know, if you're the teacher that's in that position and you're saying, well, you have to learn this because, you know, you never know, one day you might need blah 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 and whatever. Maybe there's some opportunity to either figure out how is this actually a good thing for this student right now. Although by the time they've asked that question, it's going to be really tough to satisfy that. I mean, we talked about like presenting challenges to students before. You know, I'm like if the work is a challenge, like a thrilling kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this or not, but I think I can. I'm gonna give it a shot. Like if a kid's in that mindset, like they're great. A challenge, solving a problem that you perceive to actually be a problem. I mean, you know, even just in the sense of a puzzle, like, you know, something that might not seem to have meaning, but uh, overcoming a challenge, working through a challenge is something that is meaningful in itself. It's like intrinsically meaningful to people. So maybe you can find out how to set the assignment up in that way for a kid, instead of saying down the road this will be meaningful to you. Or maybe you just need to go back to the drawing board and say like, okay, if kids are complaining and they're saying, why do we have to do this? Then there's some way that I'm not reaching these kids. I'm not doing what I want to be doing with this class and with this assignment.
There's some way you're not connecting them to reading.
Yeah. Right,
Well,
right.
I think it's generally a good idea when people are complaining to listen to their complaints rather than just tell them they're wrong for complaining.
Yeah, I mean it is very difficult because
I understand.
Because the reason it's difficult is because they actually are wrong for complaining.
Well, yes, they are wrong for complaining, and like you can focus on that. But the fact is, like, the children will tell you that like they're not intelligent enough, they're not developed enough to be able to identify the problem and articulate it in an intelligent way.
Yeah, adults aren't either.
Right, correct. But I think everybody accepts the fact that children aren't.
Right.
But if you pay attention to what they're saying, like, you should at least be observant enough to realize, like, oh, there's an actual problem here.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, and the reason I say that they're wrong is because if you've got two students and one of them is intrinsically interested in everything that you tell them, and one of them says, you better explain to me why this is valuable to me. Well, the kid who's intrinsically interested already, without you pulling any special tricks to make them interesting, like that kid is going to succeed, like in every way conceivable in life, more than what the kid who says, you better explain to me why. So there is a sense in which this kid who says, why do I have to do this? That kid is wrong. But again, like focusing on how they're wrong doesn't help them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like broader scale trends. Like, this is universally a problem for kids.
Right.
You know, I would qualify my statement to say people are rarely correct in identifying what their problem is.
Now, yeah, right. Now, I probably will in a future episode get into this discussion a little bit more. But for now, I'll just say that listening to students who are making that sort of complaint is the most important thing that I've done to improve my own teaching.
Right. It's like I'm not saying like suggesting that you have to bow to all of the complaints of your students. Rather, what I'm saying is you need to pay attention to the fact that there are problems.
Yeah. I would also say that the biggest lessons that I learned from those from that particular complaint, I learned the lesson too late to be able to help that student. And I mean, in a sense, like it's just very, very difficult to say, you're right, let me reinvent everything because of your complaint. I mean, that is what I did. But you know, like you can't. I just don't know how I could have done it like on the fly, like in the middle of the semester or whatever.
All right. Well, Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, but I think I better just skip them.
Okay.
I think it's probably a good idea to wrap up.
Okay. All right. Well, we want to thank you for joining us on the Sacred Life, and we wish you peace in Christ.